Hey friends, welcome back to the Journey to the Cross. This is week number 4 and we're getting into it as we're moving forward, journeying through John's Gospel, journeying with the disciples, watching the life of Jesus as we draw closer to Holy Week, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday. So I hope you're enjoying going through this study, and hey, I wanted to give a special shout out to our group of the week. That is Zach and Kim Cutler's group. Man, congratulations. The group that is meeting at their house, I know they're enjoying these groups. And hey, Zach and Kim, tell me if you see anything different in our setup today. All right, and anybody, you can text me or send me an email of what are some of the things you notice that are changing in our backgrounds. You know, just seeing maybe there's some Easter eggs as we're getting closer to Easter. All right, here we go. So this week in your reading guide, we've been getting into John chapters 4, 5, and 6. Now, these are pretty amazing chapters because in that there are 4 miracles. You remember the very first miracle 2 weeks ago that we looked at is when Jesus turned the water into wine in the wedding at Cana. That proved him to be more powerful than the Greek god Dionysius. And in that, Jesus was actually celebrating and affirming the value of marriage and that wedding. Tonight, we're going to be getting into John 4, 5, and 6, and we're going to take 2 of those miracles, and we'll leave 2 for next week that we'll look at, because they're both huge. So let's get right into it and look at our readings for tonight. First of all, I do want to remind you, make sure that in your guide, you're connecting with those United in Prayer moments. Each week, a prayer focus that connects with the sermon and also reminds us at 5:16 to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and be lifting up our church in prayer. All right, so in John chapter 4 is one of the most well-known, incredible passages, the Samaritan woman at the well. As Jesus and his disciples are going from Jerusalem to Galilee, moving north, they have to pass through Samaria. And as they're going through, Jesus encounters a Samaritan woman at the well. You're going to be reading about this in your group tonight, but I want to highlight a couple of things. As Jesus is with the Samaritan woman, there's a very interesting question that she asks. Now remember, we talked about when John is writing this and when John's readers are reading the Gospel of John for the first time, it's after 70 AD when the temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed. The temple had been leveled to the ground by the Roman army, and it caused a lot of consternation for Jews and Christians saying, what does that mean? Where is God? If God's Spirit was dwelling in the Holy of Holies and now it's been wiped to the ground, the temple's been burned to the ground and the holy city is in ruins, what does that mean for where the Spirit of God is? We can no longer go to the temple and worship. We can't bring sacrifices. Jesus answers that. John is the only one that records this story of Jesus meeting with the woman at the well, and I believe it's because he's writing after the destruction of the temple. Here's the scenario that I mean. The woman, after talking with Jesus, says, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet." So she has a question. Our fathers, our Samaritan fathers, worshipped on this mountain, referring to Mount Gerizim, where there had been a Samaritan temple that was built, where the Samaritans went to worship. But about 200 years earlier, it also had been destroyed. It had been destroyed during the time when the Greeks were coming through. So their temple had been destroyed. This woman wanted to know, our father used to worship on this mountain, but you people, the Jews, say that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Listen to Jesus' answer. Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we know because salvation is from the Jews. But a time is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such people as his worshipers. God is spirit, and the people who worship him worship in spirit and in truth. Wow. John is recording for us Jesus' answer for the difficult times after 70 AD when Jews and Christians wanted to know, what do we do? The temple is gone. Jesus tells them, God desires us to worship not in a place, but in our spirit. And God dwells there, and when we worship in spirit and in truth, it allows us to be connected with the Father wherever we are. Remember last week, Jesus said to Nicodemus, you must be born not just of the flesh, but of the Spirit. As we are born of the Spirit, and the Spirit of Jesus is living within us, that is now the place of worship. We worship from here. We become the living tabernacle of the Spirit of God, and we worship Him with our very life. We no longer travel to Mount Gerizim or to Jerusalem. The Spirit of God has come to us. So this interaction between Jesus and the Samaritan woman is vital for us in understanding where the place of worship is now. God has come to us. Now, this is an amazing scene. You're going to read about in your group how the Samaritan woman went back into town and began telling everybody, come out and meet a man who told me everything I did. Could this be the Messiah? They come out and they hear Jesus minister. Now here's the thing. The disciples were saying, why are we going to Samaria? And they end up spending 2 full days there ministering to the Samaritans. And the Samaritan people said to the woman, we no longer believe because of your words. We have now heard it for ourselves, and we know that this is the Savior of the world. In other words, she had been an evangelist to her own people. Jesus changed her heart and life. She went and shared the message, and now the whole village has become believers in Jesus as the Savior of the world. All right, you're going to read about that. The second miracle that you want to be aware of is this. When Jesus heals the son of a royal official. It takes place also in John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. You're going to read about it, but there's something important for us to know. In this healing miracle, this is the first time in John's Gospel recorded where Jesus performs a healing. But He actually performs it without even being there. An official comes and speaks to Jesus and says, my son is sick. And Jesus says, your son is healed. The official is making his way home, and the servants come and say, your son is healed. And he says, what time did it happen? And they say, well, it was at such and such a time. He says, that is right when Jesus said that my son would be healed. But here's the interesting thing. As we dig deeper into the Greek text of who this official was, we find out he was most likely one of the royal officials that was serving King Herod. The same King Herod that was going to have John the Baptist beheaded. But Jesus still extended mercy, extended healing power, and healed the son of this official. In that healing, Jesus is showing that He's more powerful than the Greek god Asclepius. That was who the Greek people believed they needed to go to for healing. And that sets the stage for Jesus' third miracle, the healing of a paralytic man at a pool in Bethesda in Jerusalem. Let's unpack this story. You'll read more about it in your group. It takes place in John chapter 5. It's a very odd story. And in the story, a man who's been lame for many years, since birth, for 38 years, is lying next to a pool in Jerusalem. And there's this odd story about angels stirring up the water and getting into the water. And you say, what's going on here? There's nowhere in the Gospels, there's nowhere in the Bible that talks about God stirring up water with an angel. Here's the interesting thing. The pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, as archaeologists have been uncovering this pool, it's located right next to a fortress called Antonia, where there was a garrison of Roman soldiers that were stationed in Jerusalem. The evidence is this was not a temple to Yahweh. This was not a place of healing where Jews would go, where the people of God would go, but rather it was a temple dedicated to Asclepius himself. His picture is here on the screen. You see him standing there next to a tree trunk with a snake wrapped around it. Wait a minute, a snake in a tree? That was actually the symbol of Asclepius. It's still represented even today by the snake wrapped around a pole that is the symbol of the medical profession. It goes back to Greek times when Asclepius was recognized as the god of healing. So wait a minute. Right there in the holy city was a temple to a Greek god of healing, right next door to the temple to the one true living God. So Jesus walks in, and this guy is laying there on his mat and says, Jesus, help me out. I can't get into the water. And Jesus asks an interesting question. He looks right at him and says, do you want to be healed? It's almost as if he's looking at him and saying, are you really wanting to be healed? What are you doing here? Why are you here? Jesus tells him, stand up and walk. Take up your pallet. But check this out. He doesn't tell him to get in the water. Jesus is rejecting this Asclepian temple, rejecting the waters that were part of pagan worship. He tells him, take up your pallet and walk. Go show yourself to the priests. Well, where were the priests? They were in the temple to Yahweh. Jesus is telling him, son of Abraham, get out of here. You need to go to the temple where the worship of the true living God is. And here's the thing. He'd been lame since birth, which meant he could never go all the way into the temple courts. He could only go to the beautiful gate. Because of his deformity and not being able to walk, he was not allowed into the very inner courts and into the presence of God until Jesus heals him. This miracle, this third miracle of Jesus, is amazing because what Jesus is doing is making it not only so that he can walk. He tells him, walk out of here and go worship the true living God. Now, of course, the religious leaders get all bent out of shape because he does this on the Sabbath. They completely miss the point that Jesus was calling a child of Abraham back to worshiping the true God. The same question comes to us. Do we want to be healed? Are we looking to God? Are we looking to Jesus the healer for true healing? Or are we looking in the world? Are we looking for worldly ways to find healing? Emotional, spiritual, physical. I ask you in your group to pray through this. Are you turning to the true healer to find healing instead of the world? Hey, you've got a lot to get through tonight, man. You've got the Samaritan woman, you've got Miracle 3, you've got Miracle 4, Miracle 2, Miracle 3. Good stuff. Get to it in your group, and God be with you as you learn about this Jesus as we journey to the cross.